Moving on to episode 4, Details of the Empire, titled Devoted, and this time we shift our focus to Bariss Offee. Bariss awakens from a nightmare, and in her dreams we can hear the sounds of screams and lightsaber clashes, which was caused by the events of Order 66. Bariss sees Anakin's attack on the Jedi Temple from her cell. She calls out for the guards, and we hear the clones tell her how lucky she is that she isn't a Jedi anymore, which is an interesting loophole that actually adds a layer of complexity to Ahsoka's case. In Season 7 of the Clone Wars, we see Rex trying to convince the other clones that Ahsoka technically isn't a Jedi anymore, and so shouldn't be considered under Order 66, but this gets ignored anyways.
The order was to execute the Jedi for treason against the Republic. The problem is, Ahsoka Tano is no longer a Jedi. Hasn't been for some time.
However, in the case of Bariss, it seems like she doesn't classify as a Jedi despite previously being one like Ahsoka. What this might allude to is that there is a specific database that Palpatine uses to determine who he considers to be a Jedi or not, instead of it being just based on the Jedi Order's own classification. We then see that Bariss is greeted by former Jedi Lin, whose title later becomes the Fourth Sister, a character that we also do see in the Obi-Wan Kenobi show. The Fourth Sister tells Bariss Offee that she was right about the Jedi being murderous traitors and that they attempted to assassinate Chancellor Palpatine. The first part references Barriss's trial following her decision to bomb the Jedi Temple and attempt to frame Ahsoka for it.
I did it. That the Jedi are the ones responsible for this war.
While the second part obviously references Mace Windu's attempt to apprehend Chancellor Palpatine and Palpatine's subsequent use of this incident to further incriminate the Jedi Order.
The attempt on my life has left me scarred.
The Fourth Sister offers Bariss the opportunity to join her, and you get the sense that it was never much of a choice to begin with. The two travel to the Fortress Inquisitorius that is under construction, the same one that we saw in the Kenobi show, and we can see that the prisoners are primarily used for its construction as they are wearing the same orange suit Bariss was wearing before. We see a few clones in black armor. These are known as elite squad troopers, the very same type that we saw all the way back in Season 1 of the Bad Batch, and these are likely the precursor to the purge troopers that we see later on. Bariss sees 3 other recruits, and one of them goes by the name of Dante, who is from the Caphex species. The other recruit goes by the name of Ahmar, seems less welcoming of Bariss, recalling that she should be in prison. Both of these were definitely ex-Jedi, but it's not certain as to whether they left the Jedi Order before the events of Order 66 or was subsequently converted after. The Grand Inquisitor appears and gives a quick speech, and in their quarters they debate on what to do, and Ahmar decides to leave, a decision that would cost him dear. It's an interesting decision on the side of the Inquisitors to place these recruits in what is essentially an unlocked cell. In a way, it's a bit of a power move to say that we can leave the door unlocked, but we know that you can't go anywhere. It is in part a move to create the illusion of free will, creating the perception that these recruits have the right to go about as they wish, when in reality that is simply not the case. You can also extrapolate this illusion of freedom to the dark side in general. The Sith often claim to be champions of free will, but in reality their very philosophy ends up imprisoning those who follow it. Bariss is put under the charge of the Grand Inquisitor, and he essentially puts her under a trial, to essentially determine whether she is capable of channeling her anger to kill. There is a moment when the Inquisitor knocks Bariss back and she begins to bleed, and while Star Wars animation has at times leaned towards the mature side, showing blood isn't something it usually does. So showing Bariss bleeding here really emphasizes the devotion required to be one of the Inquisitors. The very commitment to the dark side is a decision that must be paid in blood, something which is further explored later. Bariss demonstrates her own power and pushing the Inquisitor back, and he too begins to bleed as well. We learned that Bariss did indeed pass the test, but so did Dante. The two are essentially forced into a fight to the death. Bariss tries to negotiate with Dante, revealing her still good nature within her, but it becomes clear that Dante doesn't see this as an option. Bariss finally comes out on top by force choking him, something which she had prior experience of doing in the Clone Wars when she killed Tormund to cover her crime and frame Ahsoka. We see Bariss finally initiated as an Inquisitor, and we then get to see Marok, which we saw in the Ahsoka show, and the sixth brother from the Tales of the Jedi. Vader makes a spectacular entrance, and you can't help but wonder if Vader is at all bothered by Barriss's presence, considering their shared history. Bariss puts on her helmet, and I can't help but feel that it doesn't quite fit her character, which is probably what the story was hinting at as we move forward. On to episode 5, titled Realization, and we see that Lin and Bariss have been tasked with hunting down a Jedi. We then get to see a war-torn settlement, which leads Bariss to question why the Empire would allow something like this to occur. And it's important to note that while Bariss was against the Jedi Order, she wasn't strictly evil. Instead, Bariss still continued to believe in helping civilians and innocent people, which is why, as much as she shares the Empire's view on the Jedi, it still diverges with a core belief, which is helping people. The fourth sister tells her that the Empire will only allow these people to prosper once they fully embrace the Empire, and a part of Bariss is trying to convince herself that this is indeed the case by assuming that if they complete their mission, the Empire will be back to help. But as we all know, this couldn't be further from the truth. The fourth sister tries to interrogate the local governor on the whereabouts of the Jedi, and the governor denies everything. The scene kind of reminds me a little of the Inquisitor's arrival on Tatooine in the Kenobi show. Bariss takes note of a little girl and manages to convince her to reveal the Jedi's whereabouts, believing that they are still here to do good, and her way of approaching the girl is quite ironic considering that she is now an Inquisitor using Jedi tactics to complete the mission, but I suppose that speaks volumes to her state of mind. Bariss tries to walk away thinking that they have what they want, but Lin reveals the true nature of the Inquisitors by proceeding to massacre everyone. And this scene reminded me of that Kylo Ren scene in The Force Awakens. And the slaughter is a pretty horrific moment due to the ease in which Lin just cuts them down. The little girl survives by clinging on to Bariss, and Bariss stops her from looking at the horror. And you've got to wonder if the girl is going to be traumatized by the idea that it was her decision that cost everyone their lives. Either way, it's pretty heavy stuff. From this point on, it's pretty clear to Bariss that she isn't sure if this is where she wants to stand, and it also becomes clear to Lin that Bariss isn't fully committed. The two make their way up the mountain, narrowly avoiding falling rocks set off by the Jedi, and there's a brief moment where you can catch a glimpse of the Jedi as Bariss is falling. The fourth sister immediately goes after the Jedi but is knocked aside. Bariss tries to negotiate with the Jedi, and it quickly becomes clear that she is much better than the Jedi. Bariss manages to convince the Jedi to give up and abandon the Order, but the fourth sister ends up striking her down anyway. This then becomes apparent to Bariss that the Empire isn't a true force for good, leading her to turn back to her old Jedi ways. It's a rather interesting shift that is very much in line with her initial beliefs. At heart, Bariss is still about doing good, and while her attack on the temple was a rather extreme measure, through her interactions with the Inquisitors, she comes to realize that using violence as a measure to correct the world around her makes her equally a villain. Now, seeing the error of her ways, Bariss decides to turn her back on the Inquisitors and save the wounded Jedi. Bariss places a hand on the Jedi, alluding to the possibility that she can force heal, an important element in the next episode. We begin the 6th episode titled The Way Out on a snowy planet as we see a family meet up with an alien mole as they are seeking the help of the healer. The group finally meet the healer and it is revealed to be none other than Bariss, marking a massive evolution in her character, taking up a maternal role for others. And in a way, this shift makes a whole lot of sense as Bariss, now the mother, has long since rejected the role of violence in reshaping the world, now preferring to change it by using her abilities to heal. A very clear juxtaposition to the methods she employed when making a political statement against the Jedi. Another point to be made is that Barriss's decision to seek the way of healing is not only an outright rejection of her old methods and the methods of the Inquisitors, but also a rejection of the Jedi's warring ways during the Clone Wars, where they did seek to reshape the galaxy in their image through violence. The notion of what it means to be a Jedi during the Clone Wars is a theme that has been touched on through Anakin and Ahsoka previously, Dante, with both of them each questioning if the war has warped what it means to be a Jedi. And so Bariss choosing to use healing instead of violence is both a perspective and reflection of this conversation. The family explains that the Empire took blood samples from the children and tries to take them away, and this references the Empire's search for Force-sensitive individuals either as new members of the Inquisitors or to fuel Project Necromancer, something which was heavily explored in the Bad Batch. Bariss recounts the time that she was taken away by the Jedi Order, reminiscing her time with her master, Jedi Master Luminara Unduli. There is a gust of wind that blows out the candle, signaling the arrival of the fourth sister, and there is this amazing visual representation of the approaching darkness in the environment as we see a darkness creeping towards the group. Bariss tells them to run and to seek out an old friend, likely referencing Ahsoka. So I'm actually quite glad that the two of them made up at some point, considering the events that surrounded them the last time they saw each other. Bariss tells her two attendees to move on without her and pass down the knowledge she taught them, and I can't help but wonder if they too are Force-sensitive healers. The family asks what they can do to repay her, and Bariss simply responds with live. It's such a simple but significant moment that really cements Barriss's transformation from a disillusioned Jedi to a wise healer. The fourth sister comes face to face with Bariss, and the Inquisitor remarks the irony of finding her the moment she no longer looks for her, essentially alluding to the mysterious ways of the Force. Lynn tells her that she's here for the child, and it becomes clear that she doesn't really want to fight Bariss, likely weary of the fact that Bariss is far too strong for her to handle. And when Bariss continues to refuse, it then becomes pretty evident that she is indeed much stronger. Bariss tells her that Lynn's anger makes her predictable, which is a play on when the Grand Inquisitor told her,
"Falling back, it makes you predictable."
Bariss lets Lynn pass, knowing that she will likely get lost in the cave, and this is indeed what happens. The rest finally make their escape, but Lynn begins to feel frustrated and lashes out in anger at the ice around her. In some ways, Lynn's inability to find a way out of the cave represents how lost she is as a person, how trapped she is after she embraced the dark side despite all that she claims to be. Lynn lashes out like a mad dog, and she finally manages to stab Bariss, and you can bet that Bariss definitely allowed herself to get stabbed here, considering that she could have easily dodged it like before. Realizing what she has done, Lynn throws her lightsaber to the ground, adhering to what Bariss asked her to do earlier, and she asks Bariss to show her the way out. And there is this amazing double meaning to this request. On one hand, Lynn desires a way out of the maze, but on the other hand, she is also asking Bariss to show her how she can be freed from the Inquisitors and the dark side, which is rather clever if you ask me. Bariss tells Lynn she already knows the way out, and Lynn then looks up, finally realizing how. And Lynn looking up isn't just a means for her to get out of the maze, but is also symbolic of how the Empire has prevented her from looking. Her previous inability to look up is symbolic of how oppressed and kept down she has been under the Empire. And it's only when she is able to do so does she realize the road to salvation. We see Barriss's breath start to fade before finally stopping, which seems to indicate that she is dead. Lynn carries Bariss out of the maze, leaving her lightsaber behind, and what's amazing about this last episode is that it is the culmination of what Bariss has been trying to do since the very beginning of her character. She has always strived to do good, but her way of reshaping the world has always been reliant on the use of violence and force. But it is only through the power of healing that Bariss is able to truly reshape those around her, building a coven of her own dedicated to healing others, and finally being able to show others the way out of darkness without ever lifting a lightsaber. It's a very poetic end to her journey, and one that can only be realized through her experience of using and witnessing violence, informing her decision to step away and heal the world instead. At least that's how I see it. Now, we also have to of course address the question of whether Bariss is indeed dead or not, and while the episode intentionally leaves this ambiguous, I have a feeling that this is done intentionally to leave the door open to the possibility that she is alive, so that her character can be used in further stories. Now, of course, her lack of breathing does indicate that she is dead, but I do think here that there is a possibility she is alive, as Lynn could use the Force to heal her or to keep her temporarily alive, much like what Bariss did for the Jedi. However, from a creative perspective, I think having Bariss die here would add much greater weight to her actions and what she was really trying to achieve. Willingly sacrificing herself in order to help others find a way out is a powerful gesture, not only because it cost her her life, but also of the fact that previously as a disillusioned Jedi, she had sacrificed others to try and make a change. So it only seems like a rightful end for her to sacrifice herself instead of others to make that change, marking the final development of her character. Either way, I can kind of see how this can go both ways, and I would be perfectly fine if she was still alive, but I do see a creative beauty in her death, which is something I much prefer. Anyways, that's all for this breakdown of episode 4, 5, and 6 of the Tales of the Empire. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I am the Lost Acolyte,
and I have spoken.